Down 11-7, MOUZ call a pause, and Alexi B during that pause says to his team one of the most iconic lines I think we'll hear for a while, which is the game's over, they already lost, while being down 11-7. And I wanted to take a look at exactly how that actually happens, because MOUZ, not only did they have a almost insurmountable lead on map 1 of this final on Inferno that they struggled to close out and ended up losing, they also have an even bigger lead on map 4 going into T-side of Ancient, which is, of course, you know, it is a relatively CT-sided map to be fair, but at the same time, 11-7 is still a pretty big comeback, especially because it's one round away from, you know, they're guaranteed overtime, right? But to begin with, one of the things to note in this game is that Jimmy is continuing to show himself to be one of the best players in the world. If you actually look at the KD differential in this event, there's one player ahead of Jimmy. He's actually number 2. The player ahead of him is ZywOo with plus 64. Jimmy's at like plus 53. ZywOo did it in less than half the maps though, which is honestly freaking insane. But at the same time, Jimmy just has round after round in this series of insane clutch plays. And to be fair, I mean, so does Brawlin at times. The problem is, when it comes down to it, oh my God, JL. How does he lose this? That was unbelievable. He must win this, right? Because they don't, I was saying, how does he lose? Come on, JL. Come on. You're supposed to win that. I feel like when the comeback is happening against MOUZ in different games, I feel like for the most part, Jimmy's the guy kind of pulling them out of it, right? He's really the only reason they won against Vitality. Well, not the only reason, but in terms of not choking the game and losing, he's the only reason that it didn't continue in Vitality's way, and Vitality didn't close it out, right? And in this time around, I think he had some pretty impactful rounds in the second half as well to at least give his team a chance to turn this thing around. But unfortunately, it seems to be a little bigger than that. And the reality is, I'm not convinced that MOUZ necessarily had a choking problem to begin with. I'm not sure that it began that way, but I almost feel like these are kind of self-fulfilling to some extent, where teams struggle just through no fault of their own. I mean, maybe a different team has a really good map or a really good game. Maybe you just play like prime simple who just hits every shot, or maybe you just have an off day normally. But I think choking problems definitely can develop, and once you lose a few finals, I kind of think that might have been what happened to Na'Vi with this whole BO5 thing, where it's not like they necessarily began with any actual problems in BO5s, but rather once they played a few and lost them, then you get into your own head, and then you start struggling to actually close games out. Then you start struggling, in Navi's case, to win best of 5 games. And in MOUZ's case, maybe you just struggle in general in playoffs. But hopefully, although this is about the worst possible way to lose a game, if you want to get over some kind of struggle in arena situations, if you want to get over that, it's about the worst possible way to lose a game. But they did have a very close game against Vitality, and they got past it, right? They had lots of opportunities to lose this before the final, so maybe it'll change. By the way, Ime running out backwards, dodging that flash, turns back around. This is not an easy kill, but it is one that I think he gets a good amount of the time. But a quick kill from Jimfat and Zershin to actually turn that one. And these rounds are actually going incredibly quickly in MOUZ's favor as well. Navi's trying these aggressive plays, and they like to change things up quite a bit. I think Navi is a team that typically has timings that are quite hard to actually note and abuse, because they're so good at actually throwing off your timings. And I think MOUZ is a team where sometimes, especially in playoffs, they can get a little bit oh my God, JL. Okay, after this game, you actually had, I believe it was Yanko that said JL might end the year as the most impactful rifler in CS. And this is the type of thing he's talking about, right? JL, wow. Okay. JL has, man, he does have a lot of impact. I mean, it's hard to argue whether Bit's the best player on the team, there's like 3 or 4 players that have a solid argument in any given tournament to have been the best player on the team. I think usually the main argument would probably be Bit. I think he's like the main choice, but at the same time, I think JL has a pretty good shout based on especially the impact he actually gets out of his kills. He has a lot of clutch rounds, and then he has a ton of openers like that one, just getting a ridiculous shot to take down Torji and take the op out of his hands. even if they lose this round. And actually, despite having won 4 rounds in a row, neither player has a kit here. So I think maybe there was a chance that Jimmy could have stuck it and Xerxan could have covered if he had a kit. It would have been very close, but with no kit, I mean, that round's over at that point. So you've got Na'Vi picking up their first round of the board in a pretty chaotic fashion based off, again, the impact from JL picking up that entry. If he dies there, I mean, they literally started out 3v5 and JL turned that one back around, which is kind of crazy. Again, one of the things you'll notice, by the way, difference between pugs and actual competitive games is like not starting an A player is completely normal, and then you have 3 players mid, so you can actually fight over mid a lot more effectively. Although maybe this is more common in Europe, for example, but I generally see my A player almost universally starts A and gives absolutely zero support to the mid play, which is unfortunate. When you don't start with an A player, these types of things are of course possible, where Bit actually gets the lurk out A. Already he's deep into A. Now the thing is, if you look at Torji, he knows this is possible, right? They're just doing a bit of a gamble. They don't have the greatest buy of all time. So it's not that Bit has like this position and nobody has any idea. Torji's watching this and he knows that this is very possible. This is the type of communication and rotation that's quite hard to do in pugs, to pay attention to this type of thing. And you end up, this is like the most chaotic. Name me a more ridiculous mini-map setup than this. You have JL push through B and Bit on A site, and then you've got their 2 other players are in T-spawn. This is actually kind of insane. It looks like MOUZ kind of have an idea that this is possible. JL actually gets spotted out there, so JL needs to find... Okay, Brawlin, rolling back the years as if the ump was 2018. I think it's 2018 it got nerfed in, right? Picking up the quick kill. I've seen a few players picking up the ump recently. I feel like it's still pretty awful, okay? Personally, I feel like that gun still sucks. However, it seems like Elige uses it. Elige talked about using it being a pretty reasonably strong gun. But Bit 1v4, wouldn't be surprised if he actually just saved here, depending on the money situation. I mean, yeah, I think sticking around and checking if someone's going to give you a free kill is fine. That's definitely one where I think in the second half, Jimmy actually goes for a save in a very similar situation, and I think it's completely reasonable. I think if Bit had an AK, he probably actually would have just left to save onto it, but saving into Galil just feels so terrible because it's like, it's a Galil. Is it that good? Maybe if I die, someone will drop me an AK next round. That's worth more than this fucking Galil. But okay, they smoked off Cheetah. They went for like a pretty quick play towards jump up here, which is great. You want to throw that in once in a while, the timing change up. But you have the smoke back thrown by MOUZ to retake bottom mid control, because it's obviously quite tough to retake bottom mid if you have to be worrying about both sides. And then you get Xerxan up inside of the smoke in a pretty aggressive position as well, that he can try and go for an aggressive playthrough. I think he might. So there's 2 things he could be doing here. You can see him moving in if you look at the minimap, moving around if you look at the minimap. He might be trying to back in, but I think he's just trying to check if someone's in this corner. That's actually like, this is the smallest thing ever, but it is really, really effective to walk into corners sometimes and look at yourself on the radar as you're walking into that corner. And you'll notice if you bump onto someone and you're not actually in the corner, it's really easy to notice, as opposed to being the one sitting in the corner where you're quite likely that someone could do the exact same thing to you. But man, this is a ridiculously aggressive play from Xerxan. Holy crap. Holy cow. He actually just walks. I mean, they're against pistols too. This doesn't feel completely necessary. At the same time, they have a similar situation where Torji was just looking backwards. So they might be worried that someone could be on A, and then they want to try and push through to deal with that. And also, it's always, I mean, it's never a terrible idea in situations like this to force the engagement on your opponents, because I've said this many times before, but if they have pistols, they only have a certain amount of utility to work with, and generally teams will try and buy the best guns they can get based on the utility that they know they need, right? So if you know that you want to go for a mid play, you're going to buy the best guns you can get, but you need to make sure you have the utility to go for that mid play, which generally means if you can catch them in positions where they're not quite ready to go for whatever play they're going for, they're not going to be using that utility to keep themselves safe in the same way that they otherwise would if it was like a gun round, right? So getting aggressive on pistols, I think, is generally a reasonably decent idea. Not sure I'm loving exactly how that was done, especially because, well, his teammate Shelf was, maybe his teammate Shelf called that someone like backed into main there, and he was thinking that, okay, they probably all backed up into main and we'll fight together or something like that. Anyways, MOUZ 6-1, they go for the heavy mid control again. They're not really getting punished on A, although, I mean, Na'Vi have walked a player onto A a couple of times. One of the things is, it's not cut and dry, as in, if there's no pressure in mid, you know, obviously MOUZ are going to be sending a player back over to A a little quicker, right? So it's not like they can just be like, well, why doesn't Na'Vi walk 3 players out A instead of 1? Well, they're going to notice that there's a bunch of players missing. It's easy to miss 1 player not being around on the map. Missing a bunch of them is a little bit harder. And MOUZ, I like that in a lot of these games, especially on their CT side, they're pretty proactive, right? I mean, it's still a 5v5. They've lost a bit of mid control. What you're looking for is, like, you're looking for this timing where Na'Vi are going for that mid control back, and that's the timing you want to hit, where you try and retake lane or something like that, right? And that's exactly what they'll be able to do. Torji even moves his way forward, catches Jail off guard. So although they've given up mid control and Ime is going to be able to find it, they still have plenty of control of the map. Jimpat can get this kill on the player coming out A main, and they lock down A. So they're in a pretty reasonable position, although it can still all fall apart. I mean, it's so easy for these things to fall apart, by the way. Alexi B and Zershin walking into each other, not realizing it here for an extra couple of seconds. Had to decide if I was going to show that or show the kill, but this one's a little bit funnier. And that means that Zershin can very much catch Alexi B off guard just by this timing. It would take another few seconds usually for that player to end up in this position. And then Wonderful 1v3. Man, everyone on Na'Vi seems like an insane clutcher. Fake plant. He gets that with an AK, right? That's what I was talking about. Galil sucks. He gets that with an AK. That was a joke, guys. That was a joke. I was joking. 7-1 scoreline. Wow, this has happened a ridiculous amount in my last few games. But I guess I've been showing a lot of comebacks. But Na'Vi go for a bit of a half buy here. Obviously, this is a pretty solid smoke. I believe that's is that a cave smoke or a short smoke? I can never remember which one that is exactly. And Wonderful's, of course, not going to throw it, so we don't even know. Someone will tell me in the comments, though. They'll be like, Vu, you're such an idiot. How did you not know that was whatever smoke it was? MOUZ are just giving up mid here, which is totally fine. You want to do this once in a while, and especially when you're playing against pistols, you might be anticipating, based on the way that MOUZ have been playing towards A, which is quite light, you might be anticipating that an A play could be coming out sometime soon, or something like a B rush, so you can leave mid, play it pretty weak, and then you can just play 1A, you can play 3B, and you have a quick rotate to A if a push does actually come out, and you're in a pretty reasonable position to basically hold anything. And then later on in the round, you can easily rotate back into this type of setup, of course, where you're kind of doubled up towards Donut, which I actually think is a very strong setup to be in a lot of different situations. You just don't give them any opportunities to pick up guns, because if you think about it, right, one of the best opportunities for T's to retrieve guns is to fight you in mid. It's relatively close range, and if they get those kills, then you have to abandon mid, and there's no way for you to prevent them picking up the guns, right? So I kind of like that idea. Brawlin gets one before going down. That's fine. Generally what you want, like, oh my god, okay. Generally what you want is, like, a retake B is totally fine as long as you have cave control. Once you lose cave control, this type of retake becomes a little bit less comfortable. I think it's not exactly what you want to have happen. So Brawlin might have activated a little too early. You could argue that. I'm not sure if it's true though. But straight through the smoke with a really well-timed flash. 2 kills for Na'Vi, and then Jimfat into the 1v3, picks up the first one, well-timed on a bit. He fakes coming through short, and they try and go for the gun. That's something you should be doing, by the way, and good players do all the time. Baiting an opponent to, like, you bait them to go for the gun, and then you catch them when they do, and then the molly is just far too late. Does Jail have that the whole time? I mean, that molly, unfortunately, I mean, if Jimfat was lit, if he was injured at all, that would have been a great molly. Oh, he picks up the molly and he just thinks about it at the last second, doesn't he? Okay. Or maybe he knew that molly was down. Maybe he knew the molly was there and he just knew he had to spend the time to go back and grab it. He might have even thought he had picked it up already and had to go back and grab it himself, which is kind of funny. But wow, would you look at that? It's an 8-1 scoreline. I've seen this before. I have seen this before. But I accidentally made the thumbnail for my last video on the 8-1 comeback on Dust 2. I made the thumbnail, it was 9-1, and then I went to sleep and deleted the file. I deleted the file because I just don't save them when I make second channel thumbnails. And then I went to sleep, and I woke up, and someone was like, it wasn't 9-1. And I'm like, dude, Well, how did I mess this up? how did I manage to screw that one up? Whatever. 8-1. I mean, MOUZ are just looking... Look, MOUZ aren't actually looking perfect, and in a lot of this series, they just simply did not look very perfect. So I don't want to try and oversell this like it was perfect gameplay. I feel like it's undersold a little bit. I mentioned this in my last video. When people talk about like, well, Na'Vi, are they even that good? Because the teams they're playing against, they're barely beating a team like MOUZ who's making all these mistakes. Like, look, I think if you really went through it with a fine-tooth comb, I think you'd be able to find players in finals making plenty of mistakes throughout the years, because again, I'm waiting for someone to like prove this or someone to agree or disagree. It's not been addressed, but I do feel like generally, if you want to look at the best, fundamentally the best, most sound gameplay, you're looking at like group stage games. You know, I feel like every team in a big final, every team ends up making some mistakes, some missteps. Things just happen. I mean, there's not much pressure on both teams. The players that do really well, I don't think it's necessarily players that play better under pressure. I think it's just a matter of players that play less worse under pressure. I really feel like that's generally the case. And of course, JimFat, he's one of the players that plays less worse under pressure. Nice little smoke drop down. Then he's got the angle just to hold right after the smoke. Hits a couple nice shots. I mean, that's one. It's easy if you take an extra couple of bullets for one of those kills like that, even if he had got that kill on JL, right? If JL had been with Wonderful behind him, all it takes is missing a couple of bullets, taking 2-3 bullets extra, and it's very easy for that second player to get enough space to come through the smoke. Wow, how does Torji not finish that off? That's crazy. I would have assumed he got both kills. Like, I almost closed my eyes. I was like, oh, it's over. Round over. He already got both kills. In my head, they were converted. 9-1. So maybe I need to use the other thumbnail for this one. One of the things I noticed when I was looking at the thread, so one of the things I do when I make these videos is usually I either watch the game or I'll look at the Reddit thread afterwards. Not that I think they have good analysis, but usually they'll be talking about something that's relevant, that like, oh, well, look, talk about that round, we'll talk about that clutch, something like that. And so I can use that to make sure I know that something's coming and what the discussion around the game is. And I feel like, they were just ready for Jimmy to be there, huh? I don't think they saw him either. They were just completely ready for him to be there. Okay. 3v5. This must be the second round Na'Vi get, because this is a 10-2 half. And Shuhei, by the way, I feel like the moment I said Shuhei's probably clearly the best fragging IGL in the scene, the moment I said that, I feel like he's been struggling recently. Like, I don't know if he's like bad for an IGL, but I feel like he's been underperforming his normal level as an IGL in terms of fragging. But back to the thread. In the thread, I saw people, for some reason, people kept bringing up Pimp's take after the major. And Pimp's take after the major, well, Pimp's take after this series was that Blade is the best IGL of all time, which I think is true, fair, yeah. Agree, 100%. I think that's just almost just facts at this point. Like, Zonic was great, and I'm sure he was a great coach, but I think the same way I rate Kerrigan as an IGL, I rate Blade as a coach, because I think the key to being a great coach is being able to do it with multiple rosters. Certain players and certain coaches are going to be perfect, like literally perfect fits, like the best possible fit for a certain team, like Glaive, like Zonic, right? Kerrigan wasn't going to be better on Astralis, but does that make Glaive a better IGL overall? Well, I think that you prove yourself as an IGL when you can make it work with multiple rosters, right? Same thing goes for coaches, and that's why I think Blade is clearly the best coach. But Pimp's take after the major was that Na'Vi wouldn't be a top 5 team over the next 6 months. Like, as in, once 6 months are done, were they mostly in the top 5 or mostly outside of the top 5? That's how I interpreted that. And people are dunking on that, which is fair, because yeah, it did age like absolute fucking milk. Like, that is like an absolute milk level age take. And that's totally fine to dunk on that a little bit. That's part of the fun, right? But I felt like there was a bit of revisionist history in the way things were going, because I saw people, and I kid you not, they were saying that Pimp shouldn't have said that, because he should have known that if Ime continued to be as bad as he was at the major, because Ime had a very weak performance at the major, and that's, I think, part of why that rating was the way it was, right? Why he said that. If Ime was playing as bad as he did at the major, he would have been cut, which is fair. I mean, that's actually completely fair. However, I don't think it's reasonable to rate an analyst and say, look, you're an idiot as an analyst. You have no idea what you're talking about, because checks notes, you should have predicted that Ime would be cut if he, after winning the major, I feel like you give even a player underperforming like Ime, I think he would have been given another 3 months, even if he continued to play poorly. And at that point, you're halfway plus through your prediction. Like, is that reasonable to say that? Like, I feel like that's getting a bit unreasonable at that point. I feel like some of the takes around that, like, I feel like there's some revisionist history around the expectations around Na'Vi after the major, because they lost more rounds than they won against G2 in the semifinal of the major. They won, I think, 1 round more than they lost against FaZe in the final. It's not like they looked amazing during the playoffs alone. And they barely beat Eternal Fire, who, I mean, Eternal Fire had a good run to get there, but I think you're expecting that if you're expecting Na'Vi, should I say they barely beat? But there were 2 close maps against Eternal Fire. They 2-0'd them, but they were close maps. And if you're expecting to say Na'Vi looked really good in the playoffs at the major, I think you're expecting them to have dumpstered Eternal Fire, and then maybe you could write off those other 2. But not to say that the major was a fluke. I don't know if I want to go that far. Maybe calling it a fluke was like was it a terrible take? We'll discuss that in a different video potentially. But I feel like people just love to revise history so that they can shit on people. And I think if we're being honest, I don't like Pimp, so I'm looking for something to shit on him for. I think it's basically what the reality actually is in those threads, more so than that take was necessarily terrible. But I don't know why I went on that tangent. I just, like, for some reason I went in that thread and I replied to someone and I was like, is it reasonable to say that this take was terrible because he should have known, he should have predicted that they would replace a player and then be top 5? I mean, sometimes you replace a player and it's like, it's not like Legos, right? It's not like every player fits into the same slot. It's like sometimes you replace a player and that makes the whole team worse. So I think when you're rating a team, you're rating the team as the team they are, and it's almost assumed that you're not rating them based on a perceived potential replacement unless you say that. But whatever. Okay, probably lost like 30% of the viewers there when I sounded like I shit on Na'Vi, because Na'Vi is a great team and they're so fundamentally sound. Like, I can see why someone would be a Na'Vi fan or be a Blade fan. It makes perfect logical sense. I mean, actually, I don't call myself like a fan of anyone because I don't know. I'm a fan of great CS for the most part, right? But the thing is, if I'm a fan of anyone, I'm probably a fan of Blade, because damn, do Na'Vi ever just play so insanely fundamentally sound CS so consistently. Their utility. If you ever want to copy a team, if you want to just straight up copy a team, like if you want to learn how to hold mid on Ancient, or you want to learn how to do anything, just take it from Na'Vi. Their frequencies are always really balanced, as in, if they play heavy mid some rounds, they'll play very light on mid some rounds, and they'll make sure that it's masked so you can't really tell when they're playing heavy mid and when they're not, right? But all of their nades are like clearly planned out. They don't throw, this is going to sound crazy, but I promise you it's true. A lot of teams still throw some nades that just don't make sense, that they like land in the wrong spots, or they're just not as good as like this updated nade, and they still throw the older one because they haven't updated it yet, which is fair. I mean, I'm not going to say these teams are like dumb for having that. It's just the reality of the situation when you play a lot of events. But Na'Vi don't seem to almost ever have that. Na'Vi are just like, fundamentally, they're so unbelievably sound. Not to glaze on Na'Vi for too long, but they did win the freaking event, okay? I'm allowed to say good things, am I? Then I lost the other 30% of the viewers, because I was like, I almost sounded like I was saying Na'Vi's major was a fluke. And then I go on to glaze them. So the haters and the fans all left back to back. Lowest viewed video on this channel of all time. Na'Vi, fast mid control. I think this is one of the things I like from Na'Vi, where they do, I'm guessing they did the run boost on Ime to get him up towards jump up quickest. I wonder who actually came up with that, because I noticed that Na'Vi was actually the first team I saw going for that run boost in quite the way they did, where it was like completely fluid. A lot of teams used to like line up a run boost, or they'd have someone try and boost themselves, but those are the lined up run boost where they would stop. It took an extra couple of seconds. I think it wasn't nearly as strong. And the one where you would jump, I can't expect that was ever consistent enough to actually have strats entirely like based around it. I think you would have to have like a screw that, we missed the jump clause as part of your strat. You never actually really know. Even strats where, for example, I used to call it the MOUZ smoke on Inferno, where you would in CSGO, you would bounce the smoke off of half wall. that it would land on the left side to put out any molly that landed early. So I used to call it the MOUZ smoke, or I used to call it the Kerrigan smoke, I think. And then I saw a lot of other teams were calling it the MOUZ smoke, or the other way around, I can't remember. But then in Mahone's video talking about Banana on Inferno, it was someone completely unrelated that actually had come up with that. And several other things that I thought I knew who the first team that did it was not them. It was someone else that had done it months prior, but it was the team, like someone did it 3 months before, then 3 months later, then it never picked on and they stopped doing it. And then 3 months later, someone picks it up and they start doing it and everyone else learns it from them. And it's like, they weren't even close to the first, they were months later. How are you saying it was their strat? Whatever. You know what was their strat? This strat from MOUZ, moving out B. They called it, they ran it, they're in a 3v2, and not only that, but if Ime dies, this round should be completely over. Alexi B, who by the way, much respect for Alexi B to even win an event like this, to win the final when he's saying like he's grieving the loss of a loved one, basically. I'm not sure exactly. He said someone close to him. I didn't want to sound weird if it was like, I don't know, his like dog died or something, but someone close to him, I assumed it was a person, passed away, and so I don't think he did a lot of the fan signing afterwards, and it's pretty incredible. One of the things you're expecting if you're grieving is that you're gonna struggle, like you're gonna struggle, and these are the types of situations that you would expect to be almost impossible, right? Almost impossible to come back from like a 10-2 half when you're mentally already kind of messed up. Like you expect it to be so much easier to be put over the edge and to just kind of tilt off the planet, But I guess it's not. It's not easier. Or maybe it is. Alexi B is just like the Finnish untiltable legend. But we're coming right up on, and I wonder if there's more context, the round where Alexi B says they've already lost this. You guys know that, right? I think that's what he said, and someone said, yeah. You guys know that. They've already lost this. You guys know that, right? In their head, they've already lost this. This is the round that happened just beforehand. So we had an aggressive play. I mean, Bit gets pushed up straight through A main insanely quickly. Alexi B in towards Cheetah, and they seem to have I feel like they have a pretty good idea of exactly how they want to be playing against MOUZ. I think that's part of it. You have to accept that that's kind of part of the reason these games go their way, because teams don't go into these games blind anymore. They have clear game plans. They have ideas that they think will work against certain teams, and so when the half starts out with those ideas working, I think it's a little easier to go on a roll, right? Because your opponents now have to discover a counter to what you're doing, and if it's working out well, then it's going to be tough for them to get to that counter. But this is kind of a nothing burger round. I was really thinking that might be a round where like JL wins a 1v3 or something, right? And then they're thinking they're like mentally broken. That was literally just a nothing round. None of these rounds have been like particularly like nothing like mentally breaking about any of these round wins. But regardless, 11-7, and again, you have the pretty aggressive control from Na'Vi. They have wonderful in towards Temple, which is generally what you're going to see. I think the Oppers, most teams have pivoted into playing the double rifle mid, and even when they play passive on mid, a lot of the times that rifler ends up being back in Red Room, and he can quick rotate B or A. And it might actually be another Na'Vi thing. It's another thing I noticed first that Bit was doing and a lot of other teams weren't doing. Then I saw Liege doing it. This is a kind of hilarious situation, by the way. So you start out 3v5 and then Bit's actually kind of playing like Fur. Like, this is going to sound crazy, but these types of aggressive plays are kind of similar to what you think of as classic Fur from LGSK days, where it can be very tough to deal with that type of play. And I love to see it where you have a player that's just willing to do something hyper aggressive, even if it's not necessarily the perfect play. And I think that's why it's so easy to win once you're already kind of on a bit of a roll, because your players are willing to go for that. And it's very hard and rare for T-sided teams or CT-sided teams really, to be perfectly able to counter everything at once. And so you have a player that gets a bit aggressive and he's going to find some gaps quite often. And when you have the confidence, you're ready to go for those plays. And if you're thinking like, if they are there, we're going to beat them anyways. I'm going to kill them. And if they aren't there, I'm just going to get this free control. And that's really how Fur played for a lot of that kind of prime LGSK days. And that's I think what made it so easy for the rest of their players, because if your opponents are constantly spending time and resources to deal with these crazy aggressive plays that maybe some teams they play against, they're not worried about that aggressive play. They know that team plays, isn't going to do something that crazy, then it's just harder for your opponents to deal with the more passive players on your roster as well, right? You kind of balance each other out. But Na'Vi doing the triple walk in A main, we've got Jimmy it's MOUZ going for the triple walk. Jimmy and Torji kind of locked out of B, and nice shot from Wonderful. About a half second later, he would have actually been dead, and that would have been a fundamentally very different round. Instead, you've got a 3v4. A site, a little hard to hold on to if you don't have donut control, and although Na'Vi aren't in donut, obviously, MOUZ don't actually know that, so they have to be fighting pretty heavily over Temple. And Alexi B, a human decoy, actually does make it work. And then Ime is actually playing so worried that because he thinks that MOUZ have control of donut. He's playing so safe to try not to give up the kill, because in that type of situation, people underrate this a lot. People that don't play competitively or haven't played on a team, I feel like underrate this quite a bit. The idea of just like your existence is pressure. Like we've probably all seen meme clips where someone loses a clutch to someone that's AFK just because they're so worried about where that player could be. The same thing's true at all times, right? Ime existing, if there was someone in donut and not just giving the kill away because he only had 1 health, makes them have to play very, very differently. And in doing so, they're going to make mistakes. They're going to leave openings for the players that aren't on 1 HP to get things done. But MOUZ clearly have an idea that they want to try and attack A if they can against Na'Vi. Maybe they know some tendencies that the riflers on Na'Vi have when they hold A. Maybe they know that Wonderful likes to play behind this box instead of playing on this, playing as he's playing now. Maybe he plays a little more aggressively normally, and they're trying to actually push him out of the location. But it's obvious once they threw that molly, they were like, okay, it's probably Wonderful holding from Temple or something, or someone holding from site again, and let's just actually just cancel this play, which ends up wasting a decent amount of time for them. But at the same time, Na'Vi weren't going very aggressively on B, so they had full lane control, and it's clear how quickly you can pivot back around and take mid control off of this, right? They did clear out A main control, so Jimmy doesn't have to worry about it. He can play kind of at his own pace for the rest of the round, and then they can go for this control elsewhere, right? And Wonderful, still, again, he doesn't know Jimmy's there, but he knows Jimmy hasn't died yet, which is where once you kill Jimmy, maybe you can focus on something else. If you haven't killed him, then you have to worry about that there's almost certainly always going to be one coming from A main, unless you're playing some noobs, which, happen sometimes in pugs. The two things that are universal in pugs is that none of the plays are going to make any damn sense, and that your opponents can always afford an op. And that Alexi B flanking you, just going to see your gun, down goes Torji. And this is the round I was talking about a little bit earlier, where Jimmy, it was 1v3, he's kind of thinking, I could go for this, but as long as Wonderful doesn't whiff, and Wonderful got called a finals choker recently, and seems to have been proving that one wrong pretty effectively in this series. Although I don't think any one series is ever enough to crush a narrative entirely, is about as close as it can get. But unless Wonderful missed there, Jimmy would have just been swinging out into his death, and it's very possible that he just looked at the money. I think it's very much a money thing. If they have, depending on the money situation for them, he might have gone for that, but going to 10-11, and if that AK makes a big difference into the following buy, like maybe they only would have had a Tech 9, or maybe they wouldn't have had full utility or something if they go into this round without that AK. That's just a really heads up kind of disciplined play that you really like to see, as opposed to kind of giving kills away for free and just hurting, going for an almost unwinnable round at the expense of the rounds later on in the game that are very winnable. It almost feels like a lack of faith when you do that, like a lack of faith in your ability as a team to win the following round. 11-10, you've got Wonderful in towards Donut here, and this is not, by the way, the easiest of shots, because when you're holding an angle like that, you're worried about more than just one position. You're worried about the possibility not only of them being close to you, but of them peeking at the back wall as well. You're worried about a lot of different things, and you're also thinking in your in your mind, is that molly coming towards me at this moment? But he misses a shot. He, as we're talking about Wonderful, if he misses a shot, then Jimmy had a chance, and then Wonderful misses a shot. Kind of funny that how that goes, how that timing goes. It's not the easiest shot of all time. And then we got a 2v3. Brawlin kind of has to get a bit aggressive there. He has to get something done, because if Torji's left on site with like whatever, he had 5 health, if he's kind of trapped behind the pillar there, it's almost a guarantee that one of the players on Na'Vi have a molly or a nade, and he's just going to end up getting killed or spam through the wall from cave. So he wants to try and get some control, and if he gets that control, if he gets that kill, he buys a little space for his teammate to actually get out of the bomb site, and maybe they have a chance to win the round. It's completely reasonable what went on there. Just didn't go his way. And then you have Bit go immediately for this aggressive play in middle. And this is kind of what I'm talking about, where, you know, Na'Vi kind of lulled them into a false sense of security for a few rounds where they didn't actually contest towards lane. And then you have this very fast run boost, getting Bit up here, goes straight through the molly. I mean, that molly lands on the shelf, not on the box, specifically to deal with this. But there's really nothing you can necessarily do to fully deal with that play, because if he goes through it, he's going to take 40, 50 damage, but you just simply can't get a molly there unless you do like maybe there is one from T-spawn that bounces off like this little lip and lands here, and maybe that one lands early enough that you can prevent that. But I can't imagine, I mean, you still probably, I assume, could always go through that and just take like 60 damage instead of 30. But the standard one, to throw it from elbow, because you kind of need a player there anyways, right? Why not have them throw a molly as well? It's just not going to prevent that. It's just like, and then the idea of mollying and then nading, which is something you do in mid, is kind of whack. That's kind of crazy. And Wonderful does make up for the last miss by landing that one, which is another position where Jimmy, by the way, if you didn't know this, I don't think they've patched this. I tried this the other day and it didn't work, but I think I just failed in. If you go directly on the back wall here, hold shift, step down, and then just strafe back and hold D as you fall, this is a really easy silent drop, right? It's actually, I don't even classify it as a silent drop the way I classify like the nuke onto hut silent drop, which, by the way, I know someone's going to ask. I'm not even trying to advertise. Someone's going to ask. It's in my last video on my main channel. But the hut silent drop, like there's a Dust 2 Xbox silent drop. There's the old school Mirage window silent drop that doesn't work anymore. You know, all these silent drops are things that you generally have to line up. This one, you don't even need to line it up. You know, you just get on the back wall, hold shift, walk out, step back as you're falling. It barely even classifies as a silent drop because you need no lineup, and you can silently drop, right? I don't even know how I got on that tangent. Whatever. 12-11 for Na'Vi. The way this round started, it almost feels like that MOUZ was going to force overtime. It just felt like the way the series was going. But if you look at the setup Na'Vi is in, well, 50 seconds left, and Torji hasn't yet lurked out A. He's worried about, because Wonderful's basically been holding A with the op for the majority of the game. You've got 3 players set up on B in very effective positions, and one of them still has a molly. Alexi B is in a reasonable position in here towards cave. It is the position. I mean, he can see them moving around. This is kind of the problem. There's no reason for them to rotate. I wonder if actually they would have considered rotating around if Na'Vi hadn't been spotting this. Or if Alexi hadn't spotted this. So I think he sees one there. There's 2 spots in cave you can move where you can actually see this shadow. It's not just one. Would you look at that? Ime was looking towards A and he rotates back over right at the same. Maybe it's unrelated. I would guess it's related. But also, small note, you don't really want to be in this angle when people peek on you, because it's an easy angle to hard clear. You want to be doing what Alexi B is doing here, which is delaying and like peeking out on it every once in a while to catch them as they're running at you. And yeah, definitely. Well, I would say highly likely that the reason that Ime actually rotated his way over to B was because Alexi B kept seeing that. And with the amount of movement there was, Alexi B might have even thought there was 2 players there, not just one. Then Ime actually makes the rotate in time to actually get the flank off and kill Brawlin. You got the 2v2. And this is where I was thinking, oh my God, OT is actually seriously going to happen, because JL dies to Torji, but Ime picks up a molly and a smoke. Does he pick it up? So Ime's got the smoke the whole time. Okay, he's got the smoke the whole time, which is really the round winning piece of utility is the smoke. But he picks up the molly off of someone's dead body, and that makes this a pretty tough situation for Torji, who's only got 50 HP, and with the molly, he can push him out from the box. This round might have been very different if that molly hadn't been dropped in that position either, because being able to molly him out of the box means he can be even more certain that Torji is in towards A main, and this is kind of the situation. Sorry, I just ran out of disk space. This is one of the reasons that sometimes people will go for peeks before the player actually hits the bomb, because you might try and time where Ime might be going to get on the bomb, and if Torji had gone for that peek as he would have thought that Ime would have gone from cave to go to gone from donut to go to fake the bomb, he actually might have caught Ime with a smoke out. But once that smoke is down, then you're really just playing a game of rock paper scissors. I mean, where you're at a huge advantage, of course. And that's one where, I mean, Ime fakes it. Torji doesn't bite on the fake, but I think Torji's worried that he's getting 10-second diffused on, so he goes for a bit of a spam there. Unfortunate. I mean, a really nice play from Ime. But yeah, that's an insane comeback from Na'Vi, and that's, I mean, the most mentally strong, mentally stable team in Pro CS versus... Who is the most mentally unstable team? Is it MOUZ in a big event final? Is it MOUZ? I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but unfortunate for Jimmy. I mean, Jimmy played lights out for many of those games for almost the entire event. The only bad map that I can remember seeing him play really was Inferno, which is unfortunate because Inferno was 13-11, and maybe that's a map where if Jimmy had played a tiny bit better, if he had won a couple of like gunfights that he lost, maybe they actually win that map instead of losing it, and then maybe they can go into map 5. But I feel like once you lose a 10-2, 11-5 comeback in CS2, I feel like no map 5 would have gone MOUZ's way there. I just don't think that without winning Ancient, map 5 was going their way, even if they won Inferno.